Today we're going to talk about what is probably the most fundamental skill that we want to have as painters. That's the ability to accurately match colors that we observe, whether that's in the landscape, on the model, or even in a piece of photo reference. So there are some strategies that we can use to acquire this skill and get really good at it. There are also some pretty handy tools that we can use. Okay, our first step is to isolate the color that we want to match. One of the tools that I like to use is a view catcher. I like it because it's gray and it's very sturdy, and I can just come along and isolate the color that I'm looking at. The other tool that I can use is just cut myself a little mat, and it will work just as well. Before we go any further, we should jump into a little bit of color theory. Every color has three aspects: hue, value, and saturation. Saturation also referred to as intensity or chroma. We need to be able to separate out each of these aspects to really understand a color. Hue is the easy one. Is it red? Is it blue? Is it yellow? And where does it sit on the color wheel? Color temperature is embedded in hue. Now, value refers to the relative lightness or darkness of a color, and the value continuum is infinite, but it's obviously really helpful to break it down a bit. One way to think of it is dark, medium, and light, but I like to use a scale of 6 steps because it fits really nicely into Carlson's theory of angles. For more information on that, head over to the link in the description of this video on Carlson's theory of angles. Now, saturation. Saturation is really one of the hardest ones for people to get, and discerning the difference between a color's value and its relative saturation or intensity, that can be the really tricky one. Saturation refers to the purity of a color, or you can think of it as its brightness or dullness. Saturation is also a continuum. Very saturated colors are as pure as possible and have not been altered at all through mixing of any kind. Okay, let's head back to some photo reference and work on identifying some colors. It's pretty easy to determine the value of some of these darks and also the lights. It's pretty simple to figure out where these sit on the value scale. But it's a little harder to determine the nuanced values in the middle. Then we have the added aspect of saturation that can confuse us as to the true value of a color. Okay, once I've isolated a section, I want to decide on its hue. In this case, it's pretty easy. It's kind of a blue-green. And then I have to determine its value and saturation. All right, so I'm going to use my handy little value scale here. And the reason I have these holes punched in is because this is a functional tool. So once you make a value scale like this, you definitely want to have these holes punched. Now, I have a little video on how to make a value scale, so you can head over to that if you want to make one of these yourself. All right, so let's see how this works. All right, when I put this, the darkest dark, it's black in this case, I can see that my swatch is definitely lighter than the black. It pops out pretty much. And as I come up here, yeah, it's still kind of popping out. And then I get here and not so much. It's kind of diving into that. So let's bring this up, and I can see, all right, it pops out here. It's definitely darker than this swatch. So I know it's somewhere right in this ballpark. Once I'm in the ballpark, I can head over to my palette and make some choices. Okay, once I've gotten in the ballpark and I've made a few choices from my palette, if I go ahead and apply these pastels right to my finished piece, if I've made a mistake, I have to add another layer, and I really want to avoid too many thick layers of pastel. I want to stay as thin as I can for as long as I can. So before I get to my final piece, I'm actually going to test out my choices on my handy little swatch tester here that I've created. And these steps correspond pretty much right to my value scale. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to see where I'm at. So I had determined that I wanted to be right here in my value scale. So this is step number 4. So what I can do is I can actually come along, and here I've got my choices here, and I can see where this one is a little bit too light in value. See how it really pops out here? And here it kind of dives in, and here it pops out. So this one is actually more in this value range. So let me try another one of these. So this one, see, this one really dives in here very nicely, pops out there, and it pops out there. So I know that this particular stick is right here in my value scale. So I look at it through my pastel. So that's correct. So if I come over here, I can see that that's right about where I want to be value-wise. It's great to have a piece of printed out value photo reference you can mark right on it, but we can't do that if we're painting from life or using an iPad or computer, which is, I think that the luminosity is really great painting from an iPad these days. But I see that this hue is not quite what I wanted, so I picked this one. That's a little bit closer, but I'm wondering about the value of this stick. This is one of the other ones I chose. So let me see, that dives in there pretty well. It pops out there, and it pops out there. So this stick is also, to me, the correct value. So I know I'm pretty safe in going ahead on my final piece and using this stick. Okay, let's choose a couple more colors and go through this procedure. So these areas that are very dark or very light are pretty simple. You come along here and we look at the sky, and we can, it's obvious that the sky is almost white, and it's the lightest thing in our landscape here. And the same thing with these darks, they're pretty easy to determine. This one, it's not black, but if I come up here, it's kind of diving into this number 5 in my value scale, and some of it might be 4 or 5, so it's somewhere in this neighborhood. So that's pretty easy. But some of these get kind of tricky, particularly in the shadow of this foliage mass. We still want it to be bright and luminous, but how do we get the value right? So I'm going to come over here, and I can see that it's lighter. If I go right in here in this little shadow area of my foliage, and I come along here, I'm going to try to pick an average area. It's still popping out here, definitely popping out there. See that? If I come along here, it's also sort of popping out. So I'm going to say that the value of this little section is somewhere right in between these guys. So now I'm going to pick some sticks that correspond to that, and because I have my palette set up according to hue, value, and saturation, I can easily get into the ballpark. So I can pick a couple sticks that I think are potentials. So now I said I wanted to be somewhere in between number 2 and number 3, right in here. So what about this one? Now see, it's really kind of confusing, the saturation. It's pretty bright. So what if I come over here? See, it's diving in nicely to number 2. Popping off of the white, really popping off of number 4. So I'm thinking that this one is kind of somewhere right in between there. So this one is a pretty good candidate. If I pop, and I can come over here and pop that, and then see, that's just about right. Now let's pick one other one. Let's look at this pathway, because it's a little confusing. It's this pretty bright lavender. And so I'm going to do the same procedure I'm going to come along here. See, that's too light. It's kind of this middle one again, number 3. Because I come along here and it's definitely lighter than this number 4. So I have to pick something that's, again, in that number 3. That middle value range is the trickiest, especially when there's some saturation and chroma. So again, I'm going to go over to my palette and pick a couple of candidates. And let's see, this one, that's not exactly the right hue that I want. But let's just check it value-wise. It's popping off of that one. Definitely darker than that one. It's kind of diving into that one. So I think that that's in the ballpark. Let me try one more time. Let's check this one out. See, this one is much, much closer. See if I get it on here. And you see it does dive into this one a little bit more. Pops out of this one and pops out of this one. So I think this one is a little bit closer in value, also much, much closer in its hue and saturation. So I think this one is a very good candidate for me to start with in blocking in this value mass of my piece. So that's important. Okay, so I hope this helps. You can pretty easily make this swatch tester on your own, but I've already done it for you. So if you just follow the link that I provided for you here, also it's in the description of this video below. And I hope this has been really helpful for you. Happy painting. Hi there. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. It helps us out. And click the bell icon to get notifications. We have lots more coming for you.